The briefing took place on the 42nd floor of Vought Tower in a room that did not appear on any building directory. No windows, no recording devices. 3 people sat around a table that cost more than most people's cars, and none of them used their real names. The man at the head of the table, the one who wore the suit that cost more than the table, pulled up a single photograph on the screen behind him. It showed a woman. Pale blue hair, military coat. Standing in what looked like wreckage, though the wreckage itself was hard to identify because most of it had been turned to ice. Project Ice Queen, he said. Asset acquisition, non-V origin, no kill switch. The woman to his left wrote something down. The man to his right didn't blink. When did we get her? The woman asked. 11 days ago. Extraction team found her during the Portland incident. Portal collapse, dimensional bleed. The science team is still arguing about what actually happened. What matters is she's here. She's cooperative enough to transport, and she does not run on Compound 5. He let that sit for a moment, which means nothing in our current toolkit stops her. The woman looked up from her notes. And we're putting her where exactly? Herogasm. Closed environment. Every attendee already signed. If she performs the way we think she will, we have proof of what she can do. If she doesn't cooperate, he paused, well, no cameras, no press. We clean it up. And if she kills someone, the man in the suit shrugged. It was a very small shrug. Someone dies at Herogasm every other year anyway. We've never had a PR problem. The room stayed quiet. Outside, 42 floors below, Los Angeles went about its Tuesday. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Herogasm was coming up in 3 days. The annual event had one rule that made it perfect for testing assets like this: no cameras, no press. No one inside that building could talk about what happened inside that building, not without destroying themselves in the process. Every attendee signed an NDA backed by enough legal machinery to bury a small country. If something went wrong, if the asset reacted badly, if there was collateral, it could be cleaned up before anyone outside the guest list knew it had happened. Vought had used Herogasm as a pressure valve for years. This year they planned to use it as a testing ground. The man in the expensive suit smiled the way people smile when they think they have already won. The estate sat on 40 acres of private land, somewhere in the hills outside the city. No public road led to it. The kind of place that belonged to the kind of money that didn't need to prove itself. By the time the first guests arrived, a mix of A-list and B-list talent, all of them running on Compound 5, all of them already half drunk on the promise of a night where no one was watching. The security perimeter had been in place for 6 hours. PM. MC contractors, motion sensors, jammed cellular coverage within a quarter-mile radius. Vought didn't leave things to chance. Not tonight. The handler assigned to Ice Queen was a man named Greg. Not his real name, but close enough. He was 43, former military, now privately contracted, and he had handled difficult assets before. Soups who didn't follow instructions. Soups who got violent. He had a protocol for all of it. He did not have a protocol for her. She arrived in a black SUV with no plates, escorted by 2 private security vehicles. The back door opened, and she stepped out onto the gravel, and Greg noticed 3 things in rapid succession. The first was that she moved like someone who had never once in her life been told where to go. The second was the cold, not the temperature of the evening air, which was mild Los Angeles in spring, but something else, something that settled into the back of his throat like breathing through a freezer. The third was that she regarded him the way a collector regards an insect pinned to a board. Pale blue hair pulled back loose at the ends. Uniform that didn't belong to any military branch he recognized. Dark coat, high collar, peaked cap with an emblem he couldn't identify. She wore it the way someone wears skin. Greg stepped forward. He had a script prepared. asset orientation, behavioral parameters, expected duration of the event. He got through the first sentence. "Ma'am, welcome to ice." A thin band of it, no wider than a ribbon, formed around his right wrist. Not tight enough to cut off circulation. Just firm enough to make the point. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I don't need a guide." Greg looked down at his wrist. The ice was already melting slowly, like it had only been there to demonstrate something. His eyes came back up. She had already walked past him toward the main entrance, and the two security contractors who had been assigned to escort her exchanged a glance that said everything their training had taught them not to say out loud. Greg pulled out his phone and typed 3 words to the operations center. "She's not contained." Inside, Herogasm was already underway. The main hall was enormous marble floors, vaulted ceilings, the kind of architecture that was designed to make people feel small and powerful at the same time. Music played from somewhere. Alcohol flowed from everywhere. Soups in various states of costume and undress drifted through the space, with the confidence of people who had never been told no by anyone who could actually enforce it. Homelander was not there yet. His arrival would come later, and when it did, it would reshape the geometry of the room entirely. But his absence was already felt a vacuum that every other soup in the building was quietly orbiting, positioning themselves for the moment he walked in. For now, it was just noise. Just bodies. Just the low, self-satisfied hum of people who believed they were the most dangerous things on the planet. Esdeath walked through it the way a blade walks through paper. She didn't draw attention deliberately. She didn't need to. The temperature dropped 2 degrees, then 3, as she crossed deeper into the hall. Not enough to make anyone shiver, not at first. But the air changed. It settled into the back of the throat like breathing through a walk-in freezer. A few heads turned. Most looked away. The ones who held their gaze found that doing so was not a comfortable experience and quickly found somewhere else to direct their attention. She stopped near the far end of the hall beside a marble column and observed. She studied the room, the way a general studies a battlefield before deciding which part of it to burn first. The clusters of soups, the exits, the structural weak points in the architecture, the security contractors pretending they weren't watching her, the cameras that were supposed to be off but might not be. She cataloged all of it in under 30 seconds and found none of it interesting. Then one of them gave her a reason to pay attention. He was C-list. At best, a soup with some kind of enhanced strength. The kind of power that made him useful in advertisements and useless in an actual fight. He had been watching her since she entered, and he had been drinking, and the combination had produced the predictable result. A buddy of his, some guy with low-tier speed, leaned over and muttered, "You don't know who that is, do you?" "Don't care," the C-list soup said. "She's not one of the 7. "Exactly," the speed guy said. "That's why you should leave her alone." The C-list soup didn't listen. He crossed the space between them with the confidence of a man who had never met anyone he couldn't physically overpower. "Hey," he said, "you look lost." Esdeath turned her head, just slightly, enough to look at him directly. "And you look like someone who doesn't understand what lost means," she said. He laughed. The laugh was the last voluntary thing his body did for the next 40 seconds. Because Esdeath moved not fast, not dramatically, just efficiently, and her hand closed around his forearm, and ice spread from her fingers across his skin like frost on glass. It locked his arm in place. Then it locked his elbow. Then his shoulder. She didn't freeze him solid. She froze just enough to make his arm useless, and then she twisted once, and the joint gave way with a sound that the marble floor and the vaulted ceiling and the music conspired to almost swallow. Almost. The man didn't scream. He was too shocked to scream. He just stood there, looking at what used to be his functioning shoulder, and his mouth opened and nothing came out. Esdeath let go. The ice held. She turned back to the column as though she had just swatted a fly. The hall went quiet. Not completely, music still played. Conversation still happened in the far corners, but the volume dropped and the quality of the silence changed. It became the kind of silence that meant everyone in the room now understood something new about the situation they were in. Nobody stepped toward the man on the floor. Nobody called for help, to shout for help. This was herogasm. This was what happened here in this room on this night. In this place where no cameras existed and no one talked afterward. Vaught's operations center received a second message from Greg 4 minutes after the first. She's setting the rules. Outside the estate, 200 yards from the perimeter fence, a black van sat in the shadow of a hillside, with its engine off. Inside, Billy Butcher leaned against the driver's side door with his arms crossed and a cigarette between his lips that he hadn't bothered to light. Huey sat in the passenger seat, turning a small case over in his hands. Inside the case, 2 vials of liquid caught the dim light from the dashboard. V24. Temporary. 24 hours of power, give or take, and then your body started paying the bill. So what's the play? Huey asked. Butcher looked at the estate. Somewhere in there, Homelander was going to show up. Somewhere in there, Soldier Boy. The real Soldier Boy, the one everyone had been told was dead for decades, was hunting the TNT twins because someone owed him something, and Butcher had made sure that person was in the right place at the right time. The play, Butcher said, is that we wait. And when the fireworks start, we walk in through the front door like we belong. Huey turned one of the vials over in his hand. The liquid inside caught the dim light from the dashboard. And if Homelander sees us, then we have a problem that V24 was designed to solve. You say that like it's simple. Butcher finally lit the cigarette. He exhaled slowly, watching the smoke dissolve into the dark. Nothing about tonight is simple, mate. But complicated and us are old friends. He didn't mention Ice Queen. He didn't know about her yet. That would come later. Tonight he thought the biggest variable was Homelander. He was wrong. Vought really thinks they can just acquire someone like Esdeath and treat her like a lab rat. But did you see how she looked at Greg? She sees everyone there as tiny insects, and that little ice ribbon on his wrist was the ultimate power move. Personally, I think Vought is secretly terrified because their usual kill switch doesn't work on her since she isn't on Compound 5. She's literally a walking natural disaster they invited inside for a drink. What do you think? Whether Esdeath is actually playing along or is she just bored? Let me know in the comments, and let's go to the next part. The party is about to get way frostier. The Vought Operations Center for Herogasm was not inside the estate. It was a converted trailer parked behind the pool house, staffed by 6 people who had signed ND as so airtight that even their families did not know where they were tonight. 3 monitors, 2 radio channels, 1 line of direct communication to the corporate team back in New York, which was currently dark because no one in New York wanted to be on record when things went sideways. Things were going sideways. The first report came in at 9:47 p.m. Zone 4, the East Wing corridor leading to the private lounges, had gone cold. Not winter cold. Not California night air cold. The kind of cold that made the sensor readings blink twice before settling on a number that registered no logic. 11 degrees in 40 seconds. The tech on monitor 2 stared at it, blinked, and typed a message to the security lead. Temperature variance in Zone 4. Confirmed. The reply took 6 seconds longer than it should have. Confirmed. Ice on the walls. We're rerouting. The tech sat back. She was 26. She had worked 3 herogasms before this one. She had seen soups break bones, crack ribs, start fights that ended with a body being carried out through a back entrance. She had never seen a reading like this. The guy on monitor 3, older, ex-military. The kind of man who had seen enough ugly things that nothing surprised him anymore, leaned over and squinted at her screen. 11 degrees in 40 seconds. He let out a breath through his nose. That's not a soup. That's a weather event. It's Zone 4, indoor. He straightened up and said nothing for a moment. Then, who authorized her being inside? Above my pay grade. Above mine too. He turned back to his own monitor. Flag it. Don't call it. She flagged it. She did not call it an emergency. There was a protocol for that, and the protocol required authorization from a senior VOT executive, and the senior VOT executive on site tonight had made it very clear at the start of the evening that he did not want to authorize anything until Homelander arrived. So she flagged it and she waited. Inside the estate, the party had not stopped. It had changed shape. An hour ago, the main hall had been noise and movement, and the particular brand of arrogance that comes from being one of fewer than 200 people on the planet with the ability to bench press a truck. Soups drifted between clusters, drinks, and hand conversations that ranged from genuinely dangerous to aggressively stupid. Someone had broken a table. Someone else had laughed about it. Now the hall was quieter. Not silent music still played, and there were still pockets of drunken bravado near the bar, but the energy had shifted. The bartender, a civilian contractor who had done this job for VOT for 4 years, had stopped wiping glasses and was watching the far end of the hall with the kind of stillness that animals use when they sense something they cannot identify. He was not the only one. A soup near the eastern entrance, mid-tier some kind of enhanced perception ability that made her useful for surveillance contracts, had gone quiet. She stood with a glass of champagne she had not touched in 15 minutes, and her eyes tracked a line of frost that crept along the baseboard of the far wall. Thin, barely visible. The kind of thing you would miss if you were not paying attention. She was paying attention. She was paying attention. "Did you see that?" she said to the soup beside her, a heavy-set man with skin like granite who ran a sideline in corporate security. He glanced toward the wall, saw nothing, shrugged. "See what?" "The frost on the baseboard. It wasn't there 3 minutes ago." He squinted, still saw nothing. "Could be the AC. We're in Los Angeles." "So?" She set down her glass. It was still full. The granite-skinned soup watched her put it on the tray and start walking toward the exit without another word. "Where are you going?" She did not answer. 3 other soups followed her out without being asked. Esdeath stood at the junction where the east wing met the main corridor. She had been there for 11 minutes. She had not moved. The corridor behind her was hers now. Not because she had declared it. Not because she had put up a sign. Because the air in that stretch of hallway had dropped to the point where breathing felt like swallowing glass, and the walls had a skin of frost that thickened every 30 seconds, and anyone who had walked past in the last 10 minutes had turned around before they reached her and gone back the way they came without consciously deciding to. She had not needed to ask. 2 PMC contractors had not gotten that far. They had come from the security team, fresh armed, and carrying the specific brand of overconfidence that private military men carry when they have been briefed that the asset is manageable. The security lead had sent them in via radio. 2-man recon, Zone 4, do not engage, report back in 90 seconds. The lead contractor had clicked the transmit button once the standard acknowledgement and moved out. It was a phrase designed to sound proactive without committing to anything. They made it 12 steps into the corridor before the floor locked beneath them, not gradually. The ice did not creep up their legs like something out of a fairy tale. It snapped into place, ankle to knee in a single pulse, sealing their boots to the ground, with a grip that would have required a blowtorch to break. The first contractor tried to raise his radio. His arm got as far as his chest before a ridge of ice closed around his forearm, mid-motion, and held. He did not scream. The cold had already done something to his throat that made screaming difficult. But he tried the radio. With his free hand shaking, he pressed transmit. "Control Zone 4, we have the signal cut." Not because the radio failed. Because the air around it turned solid in the middle of his sentence, and the microphone sealed over with a film of frost so thin it was almost invisible. The second contractor did not try anything. He just stood there, locked from the knees down, and stared down the corridor at the woman who had done this to him. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching him with an expression that was not anger and not amusement. It was closer to the look a surgeon gives a patient on the table, clinical, unhurried, already past the part where the outcome is in question. "You're alive, because this is not the part where I stop being generous," she said. Neither contractor responded. It was not clear they could. She pushed off the wall. Before she turned, she tilted her head just slightly, as though listening to something beyond the range of human hearing. "Tell your people," she said, "I am still being generous." She walked back toward the main hall, and the cold in the corridor stayed exactly where she had left it. Back in the trailer, the second report arrived at 10:12 p.m. 2 security contractors, non-responsive Zone 4, frozen in place, physically unharmed, unable to communicate. The tech on Monitor 2 read the report twice. Then she picked up the radio and held it for a moment without pressing the transmit button. The senior Vought executive was in the pool house on the phone with corporate. He had been on that call for 20 minutes. The tech knew better than to interrupt. She set the radio down. On her second monitor, a new ping appeared. Zone 6, the northern staircase, had registered a drop of 4 degrees in the last 90 seconds. She watched the number tick down. Then she watched it hold. The asset was not staying in one place. The asset was drawing a perimeter. She typed a single line into the ops log and tagged it for the executive's attention. "Ice Queen is not following movement constraints. Recommend holding all escalation until Homelander on site." It was the right call, she told herself. The only call that made sense. You do not poke something like this before your strongest piece is on the board. That was the logic. That was what the senior executive had said at the start of the night, and it was sound logic, and she believed it. What she left out of the log, what stayed unspoken, was the thing that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the first reading came in. They had brought this here. Vought had brought this inside the walls and set it loose and called it an asset, and now the asset was redrawing the map of the estate, one frozen corridor at a time, and no one in this trailer had the authority to do a single thing about it, until a man in a red cape showed up and made it someone else's problem. Outside, somewhere in the hills above the pool house, the air shifted. It was subtle, a change in pressure, a tightening. Like a room feels different when a door opens in the next hallway. The kind of thing you register in your chest before you register it anywhere else. The estate was getting colder, not all at once. Degree by degree, zone by zone, the way a net closes. Huey felt the V-24 kick in like a second heartbeat, sharp, sudden behind his sternum. Butcher had dosed them both in the van 15 minutes prior. The nausea lasted 10 of those minutes. Then it broke and everything sharpened. Colors brighter. Sounds cleaner. His fists felt dense, heavier than they should have been. The service entrance was unlocked. Nobody guarded it. Behind a set of industrial double doors, the kitchen corridor stretched empty, lit by overhead fluorescence that buzzed at a frequency Huey could now hear clearly. Butcher moved ahead, checking corners out of habit. "Stay on my 6, Mos," he said. "We find Soldier Boy. We let him do his thing. We get out. And if Homelander's already here, then V-24 earns its keep." They pushed through into the main hall, and the noise swallowed them. Music. Voices. Glass breaking somewhere to the left. The party had curdled into something feral, and the lights were dim, and the whole estate carried the stale heat of too many bodies in an enclosed space. Huey scanned the crowd. The V-24 let him read the room in layers. Body language, threat posture, sight lines. He could see who was dangerous and who was performing. He was still scanning when the air changed, a tightening, pressure dropping. A handful of soups near the northern entrance shifted on their feet without conscious thought. Huey felt it too, a cold that had no business being indoors, threading through the hall like a current running beneath still water. He looked at Butcher. "You feel that?" Huey said. Butcher's right hand had drifted toward the knife at his belt. He nodded once. Something's wrong in here. Beyond the usual. Neither of them knew what it was. Soldier Boy entered through the east wing at 10:11 p.m. He came in fast and quiet. The kind of entry a man learns when he has spent decades being another man's weapon and has finally decided to stop asking permission. His shield was strapped tight to his left arm. His right hand hung open at his side, fingers slightly curled like he was already gripping something that wasn't there yet. He was hunting the TNT twins. That was the objective. Clean, simple, given to him by a handler he trusted slightly less than he trusted no one. Tommy and Tessa were here. They were Vought assets. Soldier Boy had a reason for wanting them to hurt, and the reason was personal, and he had stopped caring about the collateral 3 hours ago. He found them on the pool terrace side by side, matching suits, drinks in hand. A performance. They had not earned the right to perform. Tommy saw him first. His champagne glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Jesus! Soldier Boy closed the distance in 6 steps. The shield connected with Tommy's forearm guard and drove him sideways through a glass partition. The sound it produced was not a crack. It was a dense, wet impact that Huey, 40 feet away, behind a bar counter, felt in his sternum through the V-24. Tessa screamed. High and raw, and it carried across the terrace and into the hall. Tommy? She reached for her brother. The blast hit before her hand closed the gap. It came from Soldier Boy's chest, a pulse of white radiation that erupted outward in a sphere concentrated heat that turned the air around it into something that burned to look at. The light was wrong. It was too bright and too flat, like looking directly into a weld. Every piece of glass on the terrace burst simultaneously. The marble cracked in radiating lines from Soldier Boy's position, outward fractures racing across the surface like veins splitting open. 2 soups near the terrace doors went limp. Their bodies dropped at the same time Compound 5 burned out of them in a single pulse. They hit the ground and stayed there. Tessa collapsed beside her brother. Tommy stayed where the shield had thrown him. The blast carried inward. It traveled through the terrace doors across the floor of the main hall and struck the northern passage at velocity. There Esdeath had spent the previous hour building, not attacking building. Barriers, channels, frozen geometry that divided the estate into compartments, each one designed to funnel movement to control where bodies could go and how fast. The northern barrier was 6 feet high. 3 feet of compressed ice built to stop a truck. Soldier Boy's blast turned it to fragments in a single second. The ice exploded inward, not shattering, but detonating chunks the size of fists, spraying through the passage and across the hallway beyond. The thermal shock of it, frozen to superheated in one pulse, sent a shock wave through the floor that rattled the light fixtures in the main hall and cracked 2 of the ceiling panels overhead. For a count of 3, the passage was open, clear, undefended. Then the ice rebuilt. It came up from the floor in a new configuration. Thinner, sharper, angled in diagonal ridges that channeled the hallway into a single narrowing path. The shape was different. The function was the same, but refined. Whatever had just been destroyed had given whoever built it precise data on the blast's yield and direction, and that data had been used in the 3 seconds it took to rebuild. Esdeath was standing at the far end of the passage, one shoulder against the wall, arms crossed. She watched the new structure settle into place with the attention of someone reviewing work that had come in slightly ahead of schedule. She pushed off the wall and walked further into the estate. She carried no weapon. She did not run. Homelander heard the blast and set down his drink. He was on the 2nd floor in one of the private suites. He had arrived 37 minutes earlier. He had done the circuit. He had been the center of every room he entered, which was the only version of any room that mattered to him. The blast changed that. He knew the signature. He had been on the receiving end of 1 year ago in a facility in New Mexico that had been scrubbed from every official record. The memory carried weight, the specific sensation of something reaching inside him and pulling at what kept him together. It was the only memory that did that. Soldier Boy was here, his heat vision ignited. Two beams cut through the ceiling and into open air. He dropped through the gap they created and landed on the main hall floor, with force sufficient to spider-crack the marble beneath both boots. Every soup within range felt the arrival of vibration in the chest, a sudden awareness of something filling the space that had not been there a moment before. Homelander straightened up. His jaw was tight. His eyes burned, and he was scanning the hall for the source of the blast with the specific fury of a man who has just been reminded he is not untouchable. He was the most dangerous person in the building. He was also no longer the most important one. Butcher pulled Huey down behind the bar counter before Homelander's boots hit the floor. Down, now. Huey stayed down. The V-24 was singing, every nerve firing, every reflex wound tight. He watched Homelander through a gap in the wreckage and felt something land in his chest that he had never felt before in Homelander's presence. Every other time it had been dread. The cold, flat certainty that this man could end him without effort or thought. This time was different. This time, with the V-24 coursing through him, Huey felt the pull, the stupid electric conviction that the distance between them was crossable. He gripped the edge of the counter until his knuckles ached. He started. You could nothing. Butcher's voice was flat, final. He's not thinking right now. He's reacting. That's when he kills the most. Huey swallowed. He stayed down. But his hands would not stop shaking, and it was not fear that was causing it. They collided in the stretch of frozen floor between the hall and the terrace, the section Esdeath had locked down an hour earlier, now fractured from Soldier Boy's blast and rebuilt into ridges and channels. Homelander got there first. He crossed the frozen surface at speed, heat vision active, aimed at the terrace doors where the blast had originated. Soldier Boy came from the other side, shield-up chest, still faintly glowing with residual heat. They met in the center. Homelander fired first. A concentrated beam aimed at center mass. Soldier Boy brought the shield up, and the beam hit the surface and scattered a bright arc of heat. Heat that seared the ice beneath them and sent steam rising in a curtain between the two of them. Through the steam, Soldier Boy moved. Low, fast. The shield came in at an angle, a strike, not a block. It connected with Homelander's left side, just below the ribs, with enough force to drive him sideways 3 full steps. Homelander caught his balance. His expression shifted. The fury was still there, but something had joined it. A sharpness, a recalculation. He had just been hit hard enough to move him, and the last time that had happened was in a facility that no longer existed. The floor between them cracked. The ice splintered outward in radiating lines, and then it reformed, not flat, but as ridges and channels carved into the ground. The geometry forced them apart. A wall of ice rose between them, directing each one toward a different section of the hall. Neither of them caused it. Soldier Boy's chest flared. The radiation-built Huey could feel the heat from behind the bar, even through the debris. This was the full yield. The blast that had stripped soups of their powers in a single pulse. It fired. The pulse hit the ice ridge and vaporized it. The heat carried outward in a wave across the frozen floor, up through the walls into the ceiling. Every surface it reached turned black and cracked. A section of the upper gallery gave way, steel and plaster and glass falling in a tangled mass that threw up a cloud of dust and debris that filled the space entirely. For 5 seconds, no one could see anything. When the dust cleared, the ridge was gone. The floor where it had stood was scorched black and still smoking. Behind Soldier Boy, a new wall of ice was rising. Thinner, sharper. Angled to direct him forward toward Homelander into a channel that left him one path. The construction took 4 seconds. It was precise. It was calm. It was the work of a hand that had just watched a weapon capable of leveling a city block destroy her barrier, and had responded by building a better one. Esdeath stood at the edge of the hall. She had said nothing. She had fired nothing. She had rebuilt the space around the blast as though it were a variable she had anticipated. She watched Homelander and Soldier Boy, two of the most dangerous things on the planet, locked in the geometry she had built, and her expression carried no urgency whatsoever. Annie January live-streamed at 10:34 p.m. She was in a ground-floor bathroom, phone propped against the sink, camera on. She spoke for 89 seconds, without stopping, without notes, and without raising her voice above conversational volume. She told them what Vought was. She told them what Herogasm was. She told them what had been happening inside this building tonight, and she told them that she was finished with it. She turned off the stream. She walked out of the bathroom and out of the estate through a side exit, and she kept walking. The clip hit 40,000 shares in 2 minutes. Every major news network in the country had a producer, scrambling within 4. Vought's crisis communications team was in emergency session by 10:41, and the senior executive, who had spent the evening telling his staff to hold position and wait for Homelander, had stopped out picking up his phone. The narrative was cracked open. Vought would survive it. They had survived worse, or told themselves they had. But the crack was real, and it was on camera, and it was the first time in the history of the company that the story had been taken away from them by someone inside the walls. Inside the estate, the collision continued. Homelander and Soldier Boy were tearing through the main hall, each blast and strike, reshaping the wreckage around them. Butcher and Huey were still behind the bar, still breathing, still caught inside something that had outgrown both of them 3 beats ago. The ice kept rebuilding quietly without pause, adjusting to every new piece of destruction as it happened, reshaping the space into something that served no one's agenda except its own. Annie's live stream was the last thing Vought controlled tonight. Everything after that belonged to the estate, and the estate belonged to the cold. This is so chaotic. While Homelander and Soldier Boy are busy measuring their egos, Esdeath is out here literally redesigning the building to control them. She is definitely a pro gamer, and they are just characters in her world. My favorite part was how she used the data from Soldier Boy's blast to build a better wall in only 3 seconds. She is not only strong, but also a real genius tactician who knows exactly how to funnel her enemies. Now that Starlight's live stream is going viral, Vought is officially in big trouble. Who would you bet on in a real 3-way fight? Now let's see how Vought tries to lie their way out of this disaster. C. NN had the footage by 11:02 p.m. Fox had it by 11:04. By 11:09, every network in the country was running the same 43 seconds of shaky phone video, Annie January bathroom sink behind her, speaking in a voice that was not angry and not brave. It was tired. It was the voice of a woman who had run out of a specific kind of patience and was reporting the fact of it to anyone willing to listen. Vought's stock price dropped 6 points in after-hours trading before the markets closed. By morning, it would drop 14. The war room was on the 43rd floor of Vought Tower, and it had not been called a war room in 11 years. Officially, it was the Integrated Communications Suite. The name had been chosen by a consultant who billed $400 an hour, and nobody in the room cared what it was called. They cared about the 4 televisions mounted on the north wall, all tuned to different channels, all running the same clip on a loop. 7 people sat around the table. None of them were soups. All of them were lawyers, PR directors, or government liaisons, the kind of people Vought kept on retainer for exactly this reason. A crisis that could not be managed with a press release required a different set of tools. Derek Hollis, head of crisis communications, stood at the front of the room with a tablet in one hand and a dry erase marker in the other. He had not slept. His shirt was pressed. Someone had brought him a fresh one at 3 a.m., but his eyes were the color of old coffee, and his voice had the flat mechanical quality of a man running on adrenaline and institutional training. "First priority," Hollis said. "We control the language. Every statement that leaves this building uses our terminology, not theirs, not the network's, ours." He turned to the whiteboard and wrote 3 phrases in block letters. Soup-related terrorist incident. Unknown anti-American actor. Extreme weather anomaly. These are the only 3 descriptions we authorize. Anything else gets flagged and killed before it reaches a reporter. He capped the marker. "Second priority, we identify a scapegoat." The room was quiet for a moment. One of the lawyers, a woman named Patricia Vance, who specialized in liability, shifted in her chair. "The twins are already in the hospital," she said. "Tommy's in surgery. Tessa is unresponsive. Neither of them is talking." "Good," Hollis said. "They don't need to talk. We just need them to exist on camera. Victims, American citizens, harmed by an unknown actor during what was supposed to be a routine corporate event." He paused. "The event itself stays private. NDAs hold. Anyone who breaks them gets buried." Another lawyer, younger male, nervous in the specific way that new hires are nervous when they realize the room they are in is the real room, raised his hand. "What about January? The live stream is already—" "January is a disgruntled former employee," Hollis said. "She quit. She made accusations. We have prepared a statement acknowledging her departure and expressing concern for her mental health. We wish her well. We offer no further comment." He said it the way a man reads a script he has rehearsed 3 times. Because he had. On the televisions, Annie's face played again. 43 seconds. The same tired voice. The same flat delivery. She was not crying. She was not shouting. She was simply done, and the simplicity of it was the thing that made it difficult to spin. Annie January had not planned the live stream. She had planned to leave. That was all. Walk out of the estate, get into a car drive to the airport, and disappear for a while. The phone had come out because her hands were shaking, and she needed to do something with them that was not screaming or breaking a mirror. She spoke for 89 seconds. She said what she knew. She did not dress it up. When she turned off the camera, she expected to feel lighter. She did not. What she registered instead was a kind of emptiness, not relief, not satisfaction. Just the absence of the weight she had been carrying since the first day she put on the costume and smiled for a camera that was always on. She drove to LAX. She booked a ticket to Chicago under her own name because there was no point in hiding anymore. On the plane, she turned off her phone and closed her eyes and did not think about what was going to happen next. Butcher and Huey were in the van at 6 a.m., parked 3 blocks from the estate on a residential street where nobody would look twice at a beat-up panel van with tinted windows. The engine was off. The coffee was cold. Huey had the V24 persisting through his system. Residual fading, but present enough that the world still carried an edge. He watched the news on his phone volume low and said nothing for a long time. Butcher was reading something on his own phone. His expression gave away nothing, which meant he was thinking hard. "They're calling it a weather event," Huey said. Butcher grunted, did not look up. "A weather event? In Los Angeles? In October?" "Corporate spin," Butcher said. "Standard playbook. They'll push the terrorist angle next. Something about foreign interference." He set the phone down and stared through the windshield at nothing. "Doesn't matter what they call it. The footage is out. January put it out there. After that, the label is just noise." Huey watched another clip cycle through aerial drone footage of the estate taken by a news helicopter at dawn. The building was still standing, but the grounds looked wrong. Sections of the terrace had caved in. The pool was frozen solid. Frost covered the east wing roof in a sheet so uniform it looked painted on. "That cold," Huey said. "That wasn't weather." "No." "So what was it?" Butcher was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Huey thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, something Vought brought in and lost control of. Huey looked at him. Butcher's eyes were still on the windshield, but they had shifted not to the street but to a middle distance. The look of a man running numbers in his head. Butcher, what? You're thinking about using it. Butcher did not deny it. He picked up his phone again and started scrolling. The silence between them had a texture to it, not comfortable, not hostile. Practical. Two men who had just watched the biggest variable in the room change hands and were trying to figure out what that meant for them. Huey turned back to his own screen. The V-24 hummed faint and residual. And he noticed again, as he had noticed 3 times now, that the fading was slower than it should have been. The dose was supposed to last 6 hours. It had been 9. He did not mention it. At 7:14 a.m., the I-405 interchange at Sepulveda Boulevard froze. It did not happen all at once. Traffic was already heavy morning commute Los Angeles, the kind of gridlock that turned a 20-minute drive into an hour. The first reports came in as black ice. Unusual for the season, unusual for the region, but not impossible. CHP units were dispatched. They arrived to find that the freeze was not random. It covered 3 lanes in each direction from the merge point to the overpass in a sheet of ice so thick and so even that the asphalt beneath it was invisible. Cars had stopped. Some had spun out. No one was hurt. The freeze had come on slowly enough that drivers had time to brake fast enough that none of them could have predicted it. The CHP officer who filed the first report noted one detail that did not fit the rest of the incident. The ice was colder than it should have been, not just below freezing. The thermometer in his cruiser read 4 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface. The air temperature was 61. The report went up the chain. It reached a state emergency coordinator at 7:29 a.m. It reached a Vought government liaison at 7:31 a.m. via a direct line that the liaison had not expected to use this early. 20 minutes later, the Westwood Bridge over Sepulveda Creek froze from railing to railing in a single pulse. Traffic stopped in both directions. The freeze was instantaneous, not gradual, not creeping. 1 second the bridge was clear, the next it was a single slab of white, and every car on it was locked in place. No one was injured. No one was killed. The precision of it was the detail that would later in closed government briefings be described as the most disturbing element of the event. This was not a natural phenomenon. Natural phenomena were not precise. By 9 a.m. Vought had 3 separate teams working the problem. One was drafting the public statement. One was lobbying the State Emergency Management Office to classify the infrastructure freeze as weather-related. The third was quietly compiling every piece of intelligence they had on the asset they had brought to Harrigasm and subsequently lost track of. That file was thin, thinner than it should have been. Derek Hollis read it in his office at 9:22 a.m. and set it down without expression. Then he picked up the phone and called the one person in the building who might have answers. The phone rang 4 times before the man on the other end picked up. "We need to talk about what she is," Hollis said. The line was quiet for a beat. "I know," the man said. 3 soups left Los Angeles in the 48 hours after Harrigasm, each one moving separately by different routes for different reasons. All of them, the same reason underneath. Vought was cleaning house. Marvin Castillo, a B tier, with minor durability enhancement contract name. Concrete drove a rental sedan to Phoenix with no luggage and a prepaid card he had bought at a gas station 2 states back. His phone was at the bottom of a storm drain in Burbank. He had not slept in 31 hours. A woman named Dana Price, who could generate localized electrical discharges up to 300 volts, checked into a motel outside Bakersfield under a false name and spent 6 hours watching the door. By dawn, she had already started negotiating with a private security firm in Vegas that specialized in relocating people who needed to disappear. Neither of them made it far enough to matter. Esdeath found Castillo first. He had simply stopped moving, parked the sedan on a frontage road outside Flagstaff at 2 a.m. engine, off head against the steering wheel, asleep the way people sleep when exhaustion stops asking permission. When he woke, the temperature had dropped 22 degrees, and every window was sealed shut with a layer of frost so thick the glass beneath it had become invisible. Esdeath was standing at the edge of the road, 7 feet from the driver's side door, watching him the way a surveyor watches terrain. Castillo saw her through the frost, a shape, a silhouette. He pressed his hand against the glass, and it burned. She spoke once. 4 words. Her breath stayed warm, the only warm thing for a quarter mile in any direction. "Follow, or stay here." He followed. Dinah Price lasted longer. She had the electrical ability and the instinct to keep moving, never staying in one location longer than 6 hours. By the time Esdeath reached the stretch of highway outside Bakersfield, where Price had been resting, Price was already gone. But the road was frozen for 200 yards in the exact stretch where she had stopped. Not random, not weather, a marker. Price found it the next morning, drove back to it, parked, got out, stood at the edge of the white, and looked down the road in both directions. Esdeath emerged from the tree line 40 seconds later. "You can discharge 300 volts, Esdeath noted. Against metal, against skin, useless against frozen ground." Price said nothing. "Follow." Price followed. By Thursday night, there were 4 of them. Castillo, Price, a man called Ridge, real name, unknown power set limited to enhanced reflexes and a durability rating. Vought had classified as moderate before they quietly removed his contract. A 4th, a woman with no registered enhancement at all, who had simply been in the wrong corridor at Hirrigasm and seen too much. None of them spoke to each other. None of them asked questions. Each one understood the terms without being told twice move when told to move. Stand where told to stand. The alternative was not punishment. It was simply the end of movement. Esdeath offered no praise, acknowledged their compliance as nothing more than what it was. When Ridge hesitated at a checkpoint, a frozen overpass, where the railing had been sealed into a single sheet of white, she watched him for 3 seconds. Then the ground beneath his left boot crystallized. A warning, not a trap. He moved. Butcher and Huey found the first frozen rest stop at 11 p.m. on Thursday, following a trail of reports Huey had been compiling since Tuesday. Wrong season frost patches along the 99. A truck stop outside Fresno, where every vehicle in the lot had been sealed shut before dawn. A CHP log from Bakersfield, 200 yards of road, locked solid in frost, classified internally as anomalous weather. They parked the van a quarter mile out and walked in. The frost was present, a thin skin over the asphalt, dense enough at the edges to crunch underfoot. Huey crouched at the border and pressed his fingertips against it. Colder than anything sitting in California sun for 18 hours had a right to be. "She's marking routes," Huey noted. Butcher was standing further back, arms crossed. He pointed. The frozen patches followed the highway in a line, rest stop to rest stop, interchange to interchange. A corridor. Multiple people had been moving along it. Esdeath had been moving with them. "Shepherding," Butcher noted. "Not hunting, she's collecting something." Huey straightened up. The V-24 had settled into his system by now, quieter, steadier, permanent, in a way that no longer surprised him. He flexed his right hand without thinking about it. "What kind of something?" Butcher confirmed it without looking up from the map. "Soups. The ones Vought was about to throw away."
On Busan.
The convoy left Los Angeles at 9:47 p.m. on Friday. 7 vehicles. 3 armored SUVs carrying 16 PMC contractors. Meridian Group retained by Vought since 2019 for asset recovery and quiet elimination. 2 supply trucks. A mobile command van with satellite uplink and real-time drone feed. One flatbed carrying a portable signal jammer rated to suppress all wireless communication in a 300-meter radius. The target was a Vought facility outside Bakersfield, repurposed overnight as a staging point for what internal documentation called asset neutralization. The convoy was transporting the authorization to use lethal force. Derek Hollis had signed the order at 6 p.m. Vance briefed her team 17 minutes before departure. The rules of engagement were straightforward. Meridian contractors operated on need to know. Nobody asked what the asset was. Esdeath was already on the highway when the convoy cleared the city limits. She stood on the median of the 99.4 miles north of the interchange, where it would merge onto the northbound lanes. The night was clear, 63 degrees. Stars visible in the way they rarely were this close to Los Angeles. Their signal jammer had knocked out enough broadcast interference to make the sky look different. 4 figures stood in a line behind her, spaced 10 feet apart along the median barrier. Castillo, Price, Ridge. The fourth, whose name she had never asked, was furthest north, closest to where the convoy would pass. None of them moved. None of them spoke. The median grass beneath their feet was white with frost, but the freeze extended further, a band across both directions of the highway, 50 yards wide, covering 3 lanes in each direction. The asphalt was not just cold. It was glass. Smooth uniform without a single grain of friction. The convoy's lead, SUV, hit the frozen section at 62 miles per hour. The driver had 3 seconds dashboard sensor spike tires losing grip, the vehicle beginning to slide before anyone understood what was happening. 3 seconds is enough to brake. It's not enough to stop a 4,000-pound armored SUV on a frictionless surface. The lead vehicle drifted sideways across 2 lanes and struck the median barrier at 31 miles per hour. The barrier held. The vehicle did not. The impact buckled the front end, and the driver's side door swung open, and Lieutenant Vance's front passenger seat saw the second SUV coming up and had time to say one word before the rear-end collision compressed the convoy into crumpled metal and shattered glass across 4 lanes. One supply truck container ruptured. Communications crates scattered across the frozen surface and slid 40 yards before stopping. The command van had begun slowing 8 seconds before the lead vehicle hit the white stretch. By the time it stopped, it was on dry asphalt 60 yards south. Satellite uplink active, drone feed live. On the drone feed from 2,000 feet, the convoy looked like a broken spine. Castillo moved first. Esdeath had placed him here to be seen, and he was. He walked onto the frozen surface from the median hands visible and approached the lead SUV. The PMC contractors were already extracting themselves, doors forced open, weapons drawn. One of them saw him and raised a rifle. 3 shots. The first 2 kept him moving. The third dropped him. He stayed down. Esdeath watched from the median. Her expression registered nothing. Castillo had served his function, draw fire, establish range, confirm the PMC's rules of engagement in real time. The data was useful. His continued existence was not. Price moved next along the median further north, fast enough that the contractors lost visual within 4 seconds. Her electrical discharge was useless against the frozen ground. Useless against the convoy. Useful against the drone. She found it by sound, a faint rotational hum 2,000 feet up and discharged upward. 300 volts. The drone's electronics burned out in sequence. In the command van, the operator stared at a black screen. Ridge ran perpendicular straight toward the tree line on the east side, fast enough that his reflexes gave him a head start. 2 shots from the second SUV, both missed. He reached the trees and disappeared. He would get approximately 11 minutes before the frost line, a quarter mile deep, invisible in the dark, locked his joints. The The fourth stood where Esdeath had placed her, on the median, visible. A reminder that this was not random. Butcher and Huey were in the van parked on an overpass 2 miles north. Huey had a thermal scope clipped to his device, consumer grade, barely functional at this distance, but enough to read heat signatures on the highway below. The convoy had gone dark 4 minutes ago. No satellite uplink, no radio. The signal jammer on the flatbed, the one Vought had brought to block hostile communications, was blocking Vaught's own. She planned that, Huey noted. Butcher lowered the binoculars. Flat expression. A man confirming what he had already suspected. The jammer was Vaught's, Butcher confirmed. She used their own equipment, didn't need to bring a single thing. Huey watched the thermal feed. 4 signatures on the median. 1 had gone cold. The others were moving in separate directions, each one pulling PMC attention into a different thread. They're not fighting, Huey noted. They're being used. Yes, Huey lowered the scope. The V-24 hummed steady baseline constant. He looked at the highway below. At the geometry of it, the way Esdeath had positioned each figure, the way each movement served a function with nothing to do with survival. At least they chose, Huey noted. Butcher looked at him, said nothing. The silence had weight, not agreement. A warning.
Ma'am.
By 11:30 p.m., a Meridian had 3 contractors injured, 1 dead, a cardiac event triggered by the cold, not by violence, and 0 confirmed hostile contacts. The convoy was immobilized. The drone was down. The satellite uplink was blocked by their own jammer. Lieutenant Vance, her left arm broken from the initial impact and her radio dead, had organized a perimeter around the vehicles, using the remaining contractors. 14 men and women armed, scanning the dark for a threat they could not see, could not track, and could not understand. The temperature was dropping. 2 degrees every 10 minutes. The report reached Vought at 12:14 a.m. via a contractor who had managed to reach dry ground and establish a cellular connection. Hollis received it in his office, read it twice, then picked up the secure line and authorized the next escalation. More PMC, heavier weapons, military-grade thermal imaging, and a standing order with no expiration active until the problem was resolved or declared unresolvable. Esdeath stood at the edge of a service road 3 miles east of the highway, facing north. The frost spread from her position in every direction, not visibly, not dramatically. A thin layer over the ground so slight that anyone walking through it would not notice until morning. But it was there, extending, marking. A map in a language Vought had not yet learned to read. Esdeath stayed where she was. The convoy was already hers. The contractors would spend the rest of the night scanning for an enemy that had left the battlefield before they arrived. And when Vought sent the next force, heavier, better equipped, more desperate, the ground would be waiting. Huey took the second dose at 6:14 a.m. in a gas station bathroom outside Bakersfield. Survival was not the reason. Neither was anyone chasing him. He took it because the alternative, going back to being the guy who watched from the overpass, was no longer acceptable. The needle went in clean. He had gotten better at that. 14 seconds for the compound to enter the bloodstream. He counted them against the fluorescent hum overhead. And on the 14th second, his hand stopped shaking, and his chest expanded, and the world sharpened at the edges in a way that felt less like enhancement and more like waking up from a dream he had been having his entire life. He capped the needle, washed his hands, looked at his reflection. The face in the mirror was the same face. The body underneath it was not. He told himself it was practical. The doze lasted 9 hours. The work required it. When you were tracking a target that could seal a highway shut without touching it, you needed more than a thermal scope and a good pair of binoculars. That was the logic. It held. It held every time he used it, and it held a little less each time, and he did not examine the gap. Butcher was sitting on the hood of the van when Huey came out. Morning light. Coffee from a vending machine half drunk going cold in his hand. He watched Huey walk toward him and registered the way Huey moved, the slight adjustment in gait, the steadiness that was not natural steadiness, and held quiet for a long time. "How long?" Butcher asked. Huey stopped. "Since Friday. Every day. Every other." Butcher nodded. Took a drink of the cold coffee. Finished it. Crushed the cup in one hand and dropped it into the parking lot without looking. "Good," Butcher said. Huey had expected pushback. A warning, maybe. Something about diminishing returns or long-term exposure. Instead, Butcher looked at him the way a commander looks at a soldier who has finally stopped hesitating, with a satisfaction that was almost paternal. And Huey understood in that moment that Butcher had been waiting for this, had wanted it, needed the team to be stronger, needed everyone in the fight, needed Huey to stop being the weak link in a chain that had been under strain for weeks. The logic was sound. Butcher's logic was always sound. Huey skipped past the question of long-term cost. They found Esdeath at 3 p.m., or rather they found where she had been. A service road outside Tulare running east from the 99. The ground along it was white with crystalline frost, the surface temperature 20 degrees below ambient. And at the end of the road, where it met a dry creek bed, a single ice Jaeger was lying face down in the dirt. Dead. The cause was precise. The body was intact from the waist up and locked solid from the waist down, as though something had drawn a precise line across his midsection, and everything below it had simply stopped being alive. Butcher crouched beside the body and studied the boundary. Surgical. Exact. No spray, no variation. A threshold. She killed one of her own, Butcher confirmed. Huey was standing further back, scanning the tree line. The V-24 was active, his hearing extended to a 100-yard radius, every small sound registering with uncomfortable clarity. Birds, wind. The crunch of dead grass, nothing else. Whatever had been here was gone. "Why?" Huey asked. Butcher straightened up. Looked down the service road toward the creek bed, then turned and looked back the way they had come, at the frost line, the dead Jaeger, the geometry of it. "Message," Butcher confirmed, "for whoever came next." They waited 3 hours. Butcher set up a perimeter, crude but functional. Tripwire along the creek bed. A camera pointed at the service road. Huey on overwatch from a ridge 200 yards east, the V-24, keeping his senses sharp to track movement in the dark. At 6:41 p.m., Esdeath appeared. She walked out of this tree line on the western edge of the service road, 60 yards from where Butcher was positioned behind a concrete drainage block. She moved without urgency, no weapon visible. Her hands were at her sides. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in the 30 seconds it took her to reach the edge of the frost line and stop. Butcher stepped out from cover. He had a handgun, Glock 19 standard issue for someone who knew better than to bring anything bigger against a target that could turn steel into nothing. He held it at his side, not raised. A gesture, not a threat. "We're not here to fight," Butcher said. Esdeath looked at him, looked past him toward the ridge where Huey was positioned. She could have seen him, or sensed him, or simply known he was there, in the way that predators know where the other animals are hiding. Her gaze moved back to Butcher. She waited. "We have a common enemy," Butcher added. "Vought. They want you dead. We want them destroyed. That's enough common ground for a conversation." Esdeath's expression changed by nothing measurable. But her right hand moved not toward Butcher, not toward a weapon. She placed her palm flat against the ground beside her foot, and the frost spread outward in a perfect circle 6 feet in diameter, sealing the earth in a white sheet that stopped precisely at the edge of Butcher's position. A boundary, not a threat, a statement. Then she turned and walked back into the tree line. Butcher watched her go. He stayed where he was until the cold had receded and the frost had begun to soften in the evening air. Then he holstered the gun and walked back to the van without a word. Huey came down from the ridge at dusk. She heard everything, Huey confirmed. Didn't flinch, didn't counter, just closed the door. Butcher was leaning against the driver's side of the van, arms crossed, staring at nothing in particular. Processing. She's not interested in allies, Butcher added. She doesn't need us, doesn't need anyone. So what do we do? Butcher looked at him. The V-24 was active. Huey could read the micro-expressions on Butcher's face with a clarity that was almost uncomfortable. What he saw there was not defeat. It was recalculation. A man adjusting strategy without adjusting the goal. We stop trying to be useful to her, Butcher added, and we start making sure we survive what she does next. The asset was a Vought facility in the hills above Visalia. Not a warehouse, not a staging point. A medical research center decommissioned on paper since 2021, operational in practice since 2023. 17 staff, 4 armed guards. 1 vault sub-level 2, containing biological samples classified above Vaught's standard security tier. Huey had found the location through a supply chain leak, a trucking company in Fresno that had been running weekly deliveries to a facility that was officially non-existent. The invoices were coded. The routes were randomized. But the pattern held if you looked at it long enough, and Huey had been looking at it for 4 days. The plan was simple. Get inside. Copy the file manifest from the facility's internal network. Get out. No confrontation, no destruction, just information. It fell apart at 9:23 p.m. Vaught's thermal imaging picked up Huey's heat signature at the facility perimeter at 9:15 p.m. 8 minutes before he reached the service entrance. The alert went to the on-site security commander, a former Army Ranger named Cole Dawson, who immediately locked down the building and called in the drone support that had been circling the area since sunset. Huey had no way of knowing about the lockdown until he was inside. He entered through a maintenance corridor on the ground floor. Badge clone door sensor bypassed 30 seconds of exposure. Standard procedure. The hallway was empty. Fluorescent lights, gray walls, the antiseptic smell of a facility that had been cleaned recently and often. He moved toward the stairwell that would take him to sub-level 1 where the network junction was located. At the top of the stairwell, he stopped. The corridor ahead was sealed. Sealed, not locked, a sheet of white across the entire width of the hallway floor to ceiling 6 inches thick. Crystalline, precise. The temperature in the stairwell dropped 12 degrees in 2 seconds. Esdeath was already inside. Huey backed down the stairwell, slowly. The V-24 amplified every sound, his own breathing, the hum of the building's ventilation, and somewhere above him, on the floor where the seal was a sound that might have been footsteps or might have been entirely different. He reached the ground floor and moved toward the maintenance corridor he had entered through. It was sealed too. 3 inches of white. Smooth, absolute. No gap at the edges, no variation in thickness. A wall where a door had been 60 seconds ago. He was contained. Huey pressed his back against the corridor wall and controlled his breathing. The V-24 was working overtime. Every sound in the building registered as data. Every temperature shift mapped against what he had mapped. 2 sealed exits. 1 stairwell blocked above. The facility's ground floor was a grid of corridors, 6 hallways, 3 junctions, 12 doors. Somewhere in that grid, people were moving. Guards, staff. And somewhere in that grid, Esdeath was moving too, and she was moving with purpose. He pulled out his device. No signal. The building's internal network was dead, not jammed, simply gone, as though the infrastructure had been disconnected at the source. Huey sat down on the floor of the corridor, back against the wall, and waited. Esdeath moved through sub-level 2 in 4 minutes. The vault door was reinforced steel biometric locked, rated to withstand 700 pounds of sustained pressure. It held for 11 seconds against her hand. The metal refused to bend. It crystallized, became brittle, then fractured, then fell away in pieces that shattered on the concrete floor like glass. Inside rows of containment units, each one labeled with an alphanumeric code, each one holding a biological sample viral cultures, engineered pathogens, compounds that Vought had been developing in parallel tracks for years. None of them sanctioned, none of them tested on anything other than isolated cell lines and contract laborers who had signed ND, as most of them never read. Esdeath walked through the rows without touching anything. Reading the labels, assessing. She spent 4 seconds on one unit. In particular, a sample-coded V-7714, stored at -30 degrees, tagged with a date 3 weeks in the future, and a single annotation, deployment ready. She left it where it was. On her way out, she passed Cole Dawson in the sub-level corridor. He raised his weapon, a Beretta 92 standard sidearm for facility security. His hands were steady. His training was good. The weapon froze in his grip. The weapon itself, not his hands, the slide locked. The trigger seized. He stared at it for 1 second, and in that second, Esdeath walked past him, without acknowledgement, up the stairwell, through the ground floor, and out through a corridor that had been sealed 30 minutes earlier and was now open again, the white surface gone as though it had never been there. Huey found the exit unsealed at 9:47 p.m. He walked out into the night air and stood in the parking lot for a long time, breathing. The V-24 hummed in his chest, steady, reliable present. He had come here for a file manifest. He had gotten nothing. The network was dead. The facility was intact. No one had stopped him from leaving, which meant no one had tried, which meant whatever had happened inside while he was sitting on that corridor floor was not about him at all. He drove back to the van in silence. And Butcher was already there, sitting on the hood again, same position as that morning, but the coffee was gone and the expression on his face was different, tighter, more focused. "Vought just moved," Butcher confirmed. "Hollis authorized a call to their bioweapons division 20 minutes ago." Huey looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Starlight?" Butcher's voice was flat. "She's still inside, still watching. Pass the intel through a channel Vought hasn't found yet." Huey processed this. Starlight Annie feeding intelligence from inside Vaught's corporate structure. Butcher receiving it and acting on it without telling anyone else. The logic was sound. The ethics were not. Neither of them acknowledged it. "Bioweapons," Huey repeated. "They have a file." "Number file," Butcher added. "Sealed since 2019. Called it Clean Slate. Engineered virus. Targets soupy physiology specifically. Kills enhanced individuals and leaves baseline humans unaffected." Huey stared at him. The V-24 kept running his hearing sharp, precise to catch Butcher's heartbeat, steady, and even the heartbeat of a man who had absorbed the information and moved past the horror into the operational phase. "They're going to use it," Huey said. "Not yet," Butcher added. "But they will, and when they do—" He stopped. Huey waited. Butcher looked at his own hands, at the veins visible beneath the skin, at the body that had been running on Temp 5 for weeks now, at the thing he had become without fully deciding to become it. He did not finish the sentence. Homelander chose Chicago. Defense was irrelevant. Vought had no infrastructure there. He chose it because it was big, it was watched, and the skyline would make sure every frame of what happened next would be captured without him having to request a single camera. He wanted the world to see. 12:04 p.m., Michigan Avenue. Homelander landed on the roof of a 32-story tower and stood at the edge with 1 foot forward, cape catching the wind off Lake Michigan in a pose that had been rehearsed in front of mirrors for years. Below him, the evacuation was underway. Cars stalled in gridlock pedestrians, flooding the side streets, police barriers going up at every intersection. Emergency alerts had hit every device in the loop 45 seconds after his social media post went live. Most people stayed. Most people raised their phones. Within 3 minutes, 6 network feeds were broadcasting simultaneously. Within 5, the civilian drone count over the intersection had reached 11. The live stream audience was at 1.9 million and climbing fast. Homelander scanned the grid below him. Glass towers, steel frames, concrete and asphalt stretching in every direction, all of it catching the midday sun. Somewhere down there she was waiting. He stepped off the roof. Esdeath was on the ground. She stood at the center of Michigan and Randolph, 300 yards from Homelander's landing point, and held position. No weapon, no movement. Just a single figure in an empty boulevard, surrounded by the wreckage of sudden evacuation and abandoned delivery truck. A jacket dropped on the curb, a car door left open with the engine still running. From the drone feeds at 800 feet, she was a point. A cold spot in the thermal overlay that the network operators noticed but could not explain. From the ground-level cameras, she was barely visible, a woman standing in the middle of a street, waiting. That was the geometry. Homelander hit the pavement 40 yards away at 12:06. The impact cracked the asphalt in a 2-foot radius. He straightened, locked on, moved. The distance closed in under a second. A blur of red and blue crossing the boulevard at a speed that registered on the live stream feeds as a single frame of motion blur. His right fist extended force to flatten a transit bus. Esdeath shifted 3 steps to the left. The displacement was small. From Homelander's frame of reference, barely a correction. From overhead drones, it was precise, a measured lateral movement that put her exactly where his fist would not reach. His strike connected with empty air, and the shockwave carried forward and shattered every ground floor window on the building, at her back in one continuous burst. Homelander turned, found her, closed again. Again, she was not where he aimed. 6 exchanges, 43 seconds. Each time Homelander moved, Esdeath displaced. Each displacement was smaller than the last, tighter, more exact, and each one redirected his momentum towards something that was not her. A parked SUV struck hard, folding in half and spinning across 3 lanes. A streetlight severed at the base, the pole arcing overhead and crashing onto the elevated train track above the boulevard. A section of that same track destabilized by the impact, which buckled and began to sag. Every camera caught it. Homelander was not slow. He was not weak. He was simply striking at positions that Esdeath had vacated a fraction of a second before. And the energy in each strike was going somewhere else. The ground beneath each landing point was fractionally colder than it should have been. A temperature shift too subtle for the live stream to register, but precise to shift his footing by a single degree each time. Every adjustment he made carried momentum. Every momentum strike hit infrastructure. He was being guided, and he had not realized it yet. 12:09. Esdeath raised one hand. A staircase materialized in the air between them. White crystalline 12 steps angled upward at 30 degrees, each step wide for one person running from street level to the roof line of the building on her left. It appeared in full in under a second. No gradual formation, no warning. One moment the air was clear, the next the structure was there solid and silent, and catching the sun in a way that made it look almost architectural. Homelander's response was immediate. Laser eyes, full output, sustained a beam aimed at the base of the staircase, the kind of shot that had vaporized armored vehicles on live television before. The beam hit the first step and split, 3 lines, each one redirected at a precise angle by the crystalline surface, refractive, not absorptive. One line struck the pavement 6 feet to Homelander's left. One struck the support column of the elevated track directly above him. The third line continued downward at a shallow angle, missing everything on the street, and traveled 2 miles before it hit the lake. The support column failed. 40 feet of elevated rail and concrete came down onto Michigan Avenue in a single cascade, metal and structural debris striking the boulevard in a pattern that forced Homelander to move, to cover, to do the one thing he had been avoiding since the moment he landed React. The live stream showed it from 4 angles. America's strongest man, flinching, dropping his arm, shielding his face from debris that his own weapon had set loose. 11 million viewers watched it happen. The civilian feeds were worse for Homelander than the network broadcasts. People on the side streets were recording from ground level, shaking phone cameras, raw audio, no editing, no narrative overlay. Some were narrating in real time. Others were simply holding the phone steady and letting the footage speak. Within minutes, the clips were being uploaded, shared, indexed. The platforms had the footage trending before the dust from the track collapse had settled. What the footage showed was not a battle. It was an asymmetry. Homelander moved fast, hit hard, radiated force with every strike. Esdeath moved slowly, hit nothing, and kept the entire confrontation within a space she had shaped before he arrived. Every piece of destruction on Michigan Avenue had been caused by the man in the cape. Every piece of destruction had been aimed at everything other than her. The audience did not understand why. They were not meant to. They saw only the result: the most powerful man in the world, swinging at air, tearing his own city apart because he could not find the target. 12-12. Homelander fired again. Laser wider this time, less precise, the kind of output that came from frustration rather than calculation. The beam struck a glass tower on the north side of the boulevard and shattered the entire facade for 11 stories. Glass came down in a curtain that caught the sun and turned the air into a brief, brilliant wall of fractured light. Esdeath walked through it. Each piece of glass deflected before it reached her. Not visibly, not dramatically, just fractionally. The trajectory of each shard shifting by degrees as it entered the cold layer around her body. The effect on the camera feeds was striking: glass falling everywhere, dense and fast, and Esdeath moving through it without a single fragment touching her skin. Unhurried, upright. Every frame of footage made her look untouchable. She was. Within this radius, within this space she had been constructing since she took her position on the ground at 12:03, before Homelander was even visible in the air above the city. The street was hers.
Why is he...
12:14. Esdeath stopped. She held position in the center of the boulevard, 40 yards from Homelander, and waited. Homelander charged full velocity, both fists raised force to level a residential block if he connected. The distance closed in under a second. A flat surface appeared in the air between them. White, thin as a sheet of paper. Positioned at the exact height of his center of mass, horizontal, spanning the width of his approach vector. He hit it. The surface carried no resistance. It was frictionless, a plane that redirected momentum rather than absorbing it. Homelander's body passed through, and his trajectory shifted by 18 degrees. Precise. Calculated. Enough to move him off axis to send him 4 feet past Esdeath, to carry him directly into the facade of the building on her right at full speed. 4th floor. He struck concrete and glass and went through 2 interior walls before stopping. 4 seconds later he emerged, brushed dust from his cape, turned back to face her. But every camera had seen what happened. The live stream feed showed it from 3 angles, the strongest man in the world, redirected by a surface that should have been nothing, driven into a building by his own forward momentum. His face, caught in close-up by a drone at 600 feet, showed the first visible crack in the mask, jaw, tight eyes scanning too fast. A flicker of confusion that lasted less than a second before the performance reassembled itself. 11.4 million viewers saw it. Homelander fired one more time. Maximum output. sustained, aimed directly at Esdeath's chest from 40 yards. The beam stopped 3 feet in front of her. A sphere of crystalline density held it in place. The energy contained the light refracting outward in a corona of white that lit up the entire intersection for 2 full seconds. The sphere held. The beam burned. And then Esdeath closed her fist, and the sphere collapsed, and the beam died with it, and the light disappeared, and the boulevard was quiet for the first time in 8 minutes. Homelander stared at her. Every camera was on him. The close-up feeds showed his face in full, the confusion raw and uncontrolled, visible for 1 second before the mask came back. Then he turned and accelerated upward, straight vertical fast to leave a visible trail in the air, and within 3 seconds he was above the cloud layer and gone from every feed simultaneously. He did not look back. Esdeath stood in the boulevard for 11 seconds after he disappeared. Then she turned north and walked. Normal pace, away from the drones, away from the crowds pressed against buildings on the side streets, away from the network cameras that were already adjusting altitude to track her movement. She held normal pace. She moved out of frame the way anyone moves out of frame, by walking until the cameras could no longer see her. Within 90 seconds, every aerial feed had lost her. The last image any camera captured was a single frame from a civilian drone at 400 feet. A figure on a side street viewed from above, moving away from the intersection. Behind her, Michigan Avenue bore the marks of what had happened: glass on the pavement, a section of elevated track hanging from its supports at a broken angle, a crater in the 4th floor of an office tower. The street itself was cracked and scarred, but standing. Vaught's first statement went out at 12:31, 14 minutes after Homelander left. The language was careful, corporate, and contradictory. Coordinating with federal authorities, urging calm, trusting America's heroes. No mention of him by name, no acknowledgement of what the cameras had shown, no explanation for why the company's flagship asset had been visibly outmaneuvered on live television by a single individual who had thrown 0 punches in 8 minutes of public confrontation. Derek Hollis watched the replay in his office at 1:15 p.m. He watched the moment where the laser split against the staircase. He watched the moment where he was redirected into the building. He watched the close-up of Homelander's face, the doubt brief and undeniable, and turned off the screen. He picked up the secure line. The call lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, he opened the desk drawer. A single sheet of paper lay where he had placed it 3 days earlier. Pre-signed, predated authorization for a project that had been sealed since 2019. At the top of the page in plain text, clean slate deployment authorization. Hollis set it on the desk, looked at it. The pen was in his hand. He set the pen down, closed the drawer. Not yet. 8 blocks north on the roof of a parking structure, Huey watched the replay for the 4th time on his device. The afternoon light was fading. The V-24 was quiet in his chest present, but thin the way it always felt in the hours before the next dose. On the screen, Esdeath walked through the falling glass, unhurried, each shard missing her by fractions of degrees. The footage looped. Huey watched it again. Butcher was beside him, looking out at the skyline, the smoke rising from Michigan Avenue. The helicopters circling at altitude, the city absorbing the damage the way cities always did. He had been quiet for 20 minutes. 14 million by now, Huey noted, checking the viewer count. Butcher turned from the skyline and looked at the screen on Huey's device. Watched 3 seconds of the footage. Esdeath in the center of the frame, the city broken around her, the cape of the strongest man in the world disappearing into the clouds above. It's not over, Butcher confirmed, but it's done. Huey looked at the screen one more time. The gap between what the V-24 gave him and what he had just watched on camera was not measurable in power levels or enhanced reflexes. It was a different kind of distance, the kind that could not be closed. He turned off the device. The skyline of Chicago stretched out before them, glass and steel and concrete catching the last of the afternoon sun. And somewhere in that geometry, 14 million people were watching the same footage, and none of them were watching the same thing. Homelander finally met his match, and he didn't even get hit once. That's so disrespectful. Esdeath just used his own speed against him like he was a toddler. Seeing him fly away into the clouds, we can tell he realized he is not the main character anymore. Vought is so desperate now that they are pulling out the clean slate virus. But what's important is that it only works on people with compound Vi. Since Esdeath is a non-V origin, Vought has absolutely zero plan to stop her. I wonder if Homelander will ever be coming back after that embarrassment. How about you? What do you think he is doing in that safe house? The port of Newark stopped moving at 4:17 a.m. on a Thursday, not dramatically. No explosion, no collapse, no visible event that the morning news could package into a single image. The cranes simply stopped. Their hydraulic lines seized at the joint. The fluid inside them crystallized overnight into a substance that was no longer oil, and no longer anything the maintenance crews had a name for. 14 container ships sat in the harbor loaded, unable to dock. The backup queue extended 11 miles into the channel. By 6 a.m., and the Port Authority had declared a hold. By 7, the Department of Transportation was fielding calls from every logistics company on the East Coast. By 8, the first reports confirmed what the maintenance teams had already understood. This was not mechanical failure. The freeze was precise, surgical. It had targeted hydraulic systems at 3 other ports along the coast, Elizabeth Bayonne, and the eastern terminal at JFK, and left everything else intact. Someone had drawn a line, and everything on one side of it had stopped working. Vaught's emergency board convened at 9:30 a.m. in the Midtown Tower, 40 floors above the traffic that had begun to lock up on the VFDR drive. 12 people in a room with no windows. Derek Hollis at the head of the table, the pen still in his breast pocket where he had placed it after closing the drawer 3 days earlier. The virus file was open on the central display. Not the authorization page, the technical specifications. Pages of biological data delivery mechanisms, deployment protocols. The work of 6 years of research conducted in facilities that appeared on no public record. "Walk me through it again," Hollis said. Dr. Sarah Chen, lead researcher on Clean Slate, stood at the display and pointed to a molecular diagram that meant nothing to 11 of the 12 people in the room. The compound targets compound 5 at the cellular level. Any organism that has been modified by V, enhanced metabolism, accelerated healing genetic restructuring becomes vulnerable. The virus rewrites the enhancement at the DNA level, turns it off, permanently. Timeline. Airborne dispersal covers a metro area in 6 hours. Full systemic effect within 48. The subjects would experience progressive deterioration, loss of enhancement, organ failure in cases where the enhancement was load-bearing. Death in most cases within 72 hours. Silence in the room. The air conditioning hummed. "And baseline humans?" Hollis asked. "Unaffected. The virus has no vector without compound Vi present. Clean separation." Hollis nodded once. Looked at the faces around the table, lawyers, strategists, the head of Vought Security. 2 people from the government liaison office who had arrived without explanation and said nothing since they sat down. Every face was doing the same calculation, the same arithmetic of risk and necessity, and how far a company could go before the thing it had built to protect itself became the thing that destroyed it. "And the target?" one of the government liaisons asked, the one from Chicago. Chen looked at the diagram, pulled up a second file, thermal data satellite imagery, biological readings captured during the Michigan Avenue confrontation. All of it incomplete, all of it inconclusive. "We have no confirmed biological profile," Chen confirmed. "No tissue sample, no direct exposure data. Based on the thermal readings from Chicago, her core temperature registers below any known baseline for enhanced individuals. The data is anomalous. Can we assume compound vi? Chen paused. The pause lasted 2 seconds. In a room full of people who understood what 2 seconds meant, when a scientist paused, it registered. No, she said. We cannot assume that. The George Washington Bridge froze at 11:42 a.m., not the entire structure. The upper deck remained operational, traffic moving both directions unimpeded. The lower deck sealed overnight in a layer of white that was 3 inches thick, uniform from the New York anchorage to the New Jersey tower, and impervious to every thermal treatment the Port Authority threw at it. Road salt had no effect. Steam application had no effect. Jackhammers cracked the surface but could not penetrate it. The lower deck carried 40% of the bridge's daily capacity. Rerouting that traffic through the Tappan Zee and the tunnels added 90 minutes to every commercial shipment moving between Manhattan and the rest of the country. It was not a shutdown. It was a reduction, a throttling. The kind of change that did not stop the world from turning, but made it turn slower and kept turning slower, and gave no indication that it would ever turn back to speed. Power stations were next. Not all of them. 3 substations in northern New Jersey, serving residential areas in Bergen and Passaic counties, experienced simultaneous failures in their transformer cooling systems at 2:15 p.m. The coolant lines froze. The transformers overheated and tripped their safety shutoffs. Rolling blackouts began at 2:34 p.m. and continued through the afternoon, affecting 340,000 households in a pattern that followed no geographic logic visible from the outside. From the inside, from the perspective of someone who understood what was being targeted and why the pattern was precise. 3 substations, 3 points of pressure, not enough to collapse the grid, enough to make the grid aware that it was being watched. Homelander was in Los Angeles. He had not been seen publicly since Chicago. Vought had issued a statement carefully worded, strategically vague, claiming that America's top hero is conducting operations in a separate theater of response. The statement made no reference to Michigan Avenue. It made no reference to the footage that had been viewed 200 million times in the 48 hours since it was captured. In reality, Homelander was in a Vought safe house in the Hollywood Hills, and he had not spoken to anyone in 36 hours. The footage played on a loop on the television in the living room, not because he was watching it, but because he could not bring himself to turn it off. The image repeated himself, redirected into a building by a surface that should have been nothing. His face caught in close-up, showing the crack, the cape disappearing into the clouds. He had watched it 140 times. The anger was still there. It had not diminished. But beneath it, in a place he had spent his entire life refusing to look, there was something else. Something that felt less like rage and more like the absence of certainty. For the first time in his life, he had encountered a situation in which being stronger was not the variable that determined the outcome. He did not know what to do with that. The second appearance happened at 6:08 p.m. A water treatment facility in Hackensack, New Jersey. A maintenance worker on the night shift found it during his 6 p.m. rounds, a single point of contact on the primary filtration intake where the municipal water supply entered the treatment system. The pipe was steel, 18 inches in diameter, running underground from the reservoir. At the contact point, a section of pipe 12 inches long had been sealed from the outside. The seal was white, crystalline, impervious to the worker's wrench, his acetylene torch, and the emergency response team that arrived 14 minutes later. The seal did not block the water. It narrowed the flow by approximately 30%, enough to reduce pressure in the downstream system, enough to trigger automated alerts at 6 municipal facilities, enough to force the city into emergency rationing protocols within 2 hours. No one had seen anyone near the facility. The security cameras showed nothing. No figure, no movement, no anomaly. Just the seal appearing between one round and the next, as though it had always been there. One point of contact, one surgical intervention. The message was not in the scale of the action, but in the precision of it. In the fact that whoever had done this knew exactly where to press and how hard, and had pressed it and had left no trace. Huey found Butcher at 9 p.m. in the apartment they had been using in Jersey City. A 2-bedroom above a closed restaurant on Newport Boulevard, rented under a name that did not belong to either of them. The windows faced west toward Manhattan. The skyline was visible across the river, lit up the way it was always lit up, glass and steel catching light from a million sources. Nothing looked different. Nothing looked wrong. Butcher was sitting on the kitchen floor, not on a chair. On the floor back against the cabinet under the sink, legs stretched out in front of him. A syringe in his right hand. Full. The contents were the pale amber color that Huey recognized, Temp 5 1-dose standard concentration. Butcher was looking at it. Huey stood in the doorway and watched him for a long time without speaking. The apartment was quiet. Outside, a siren moved through the distance and faded. The skyline glowed. Then Butcher opened his hand and set the syringe on the kitchen tile carefully, the way someone sets down something that has become too heavy to hold. He did not look at Huey. He did not explain. He left it where it was and stood up and walked past Huey into the other room without a word. Huey looked at the syringe on the floor. The amber liquid caught the light from the window. He did not touch it. He did not pick it up. He left it where it was and sat down on the floor in the same spot where Butcher had been sitting and looked out at the skyline and waited for something to change. Nothing changed. The board meeting reconvened at 11 p.m. Hollis had spent the afternoon on calls. Government, military, 3 separate conversations with people whose titles he did not share with the rest of the room. The situation had been presented to him in clear terms. The disruptions along the East Coast were escalating in precision, not in scale. The pattern was consistent with targeted infrastructure interdiction. The responsible party had not been identified, located, or contacted. Deploy or don't, one of the liaisons said. The man had not given his name at any point during the meeting. He sat at the far end of the table with his hands flat on the surface and spoke in the flat, affectless tone of someone who had spent decades in rooms exactly like this one. But make the decision. We can't keep sitting on it. Hollis looked at Chen. If we deploy, what's the probability it works on her? Chen had spent the afternoon on the same question. The data from Chicago was on her tablet. The thermal readings, the biological anomalies, the absence of any confirmed compound V signature in the target's profile. She had run the numbers 4 times. The answer had not changed. It won't work, Chen said. The room went quiet. Elaborate, Hollis said. Clean slate targets compound V. That's the vector. That's the mechanism. Every enhanced individual we have data on, every soup in Vaught's registry, every subject in the trial database responds to the compound because they were modified by it. Their biology is built on V. The virus dismantles that foundation. She pulled up the thermal data from Chicago on the main display. The cold spot, the depression in the heat signature, the readings that had no precedent in any biological database Vaught had access to. This individual's biology does not appear to be built on compound 5. The enhancement, if that's even the right word, operates on a different mechanism entirely. One we have no data on, no model for, and no countermeasure against. Hollis stared at the display, at the cold spot in the middle of the thermal overlay, at the thing they had spent 6 years building a weapon against, which turned out to be a weapon built against the wrong target. So we have nothing, Hollis said. We have a virus that kills every enhanced human being on the planet. Chen confirmed. And zero effect on the one person we actually needed to work on. The city kept moving. Newark reopened 3 of its 4 cranes at 2 a.m. Friday, the crystallized hydraulic fluid had not dissolved, but the engineers had bypassed the affected systems with manual hydraulic rigs, slow and imprecise, but functional. Ships began docking at dawn. The queue shortened. The supply chain resumed at reduced capacity, grinding forward the way it always ground forward when something blocked it, not by removing the obstruction, but by finding a way around it. The George Washington Bridge lower deck remained sealed. City crews had stopped trying to remove the freeze overnight and were instead working on temporary traffic rerouting, new signal patterns, contraflow lanes on the upper deck, coordination with the tunnel authority. It would work. It would be slower. It would continue to be slower for as long as the seal held, and no one could say how long that would be. The power substations in Bergen County came back online at intermittent capacity. The rolling blackouts continued through Friday and into the weekend. FEMA was notified. The governor's office issued a statement. The markets opened down 2% and recovered half of it by noon, somewhere in the city. In the infrastructure, in the systems, in the 1,000 interconnected mechanisms that kept 10 million people fed and warm. And moving, there were points of cold that had not been there a week ago. Small, precise, invisible to anyone who was not looking for them. They sat inside pipes and cables and structural joints like seeds, waiting for nothing attached to nothing, answering to no one. Winter had not come. It had stayed.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.